The desert stretched endlessly beneath Elisa's gaze, its sand dunes rolling in the wave of burnt orange under the late afternoon sun. The winds kicked up dust, scattering the grains like tiny shards of glass. On the roof of her small adobe shack, Elisa sat perched, her legs crossed and eyes focused on the horizon. Her father's telescope, withered but reliable, was aimed at the sky. His disappearance had left a void in her heart, but his tools, his lessons, still lingered, always with her, even in his absence. For years, Elisa had watched the skies, hoping for a sign, hoping that whatever had taken her father would eventually reveal itself. And now she had found it. The signal came 3 nights ago, low, faint, but unmistakable. It pierced the stillness of the desert like a cry in the night. An unnatural whine that reverberated through her bones. It wasn't static, it wasn't just random interference. No, this was something alive. Elisa had immediately set to work decoding it. But its complexity overwhelmed her. The message was encrypted. Its patterns strange, erotic, yet strongly deliberate. It wasn't meant for anyone in particular, but it was definitely meant for someone. And then, on the 4th night, it happened. A sudden brilliant flash of light streaked across the heavens, too large to be meteor, too controlled to be a falling star. Elisa's heart raced as she watched the light flare up and then vanish, its tail of fire trailing like a comet. Crashing far beyond the village, the earth trembled beneath her feet as if responding to the crash. A low, terrifying rumble followed. The dunes shifted violently as though the earth itself was alive. Her fathers had always warned her about the unknowns of the sky. He had been right. This wasn't just a crash. It was a warning. Elisa packed her satchel with a sense of urgency, almost as if the desert itself was urging her onward. Water, a knife, her father's compass, these were her tools, and with them she would venture where no one else dared. Her heart pounded in her chest, but it wasn't fear, it was something deeper, the promise of answers of truth. The village was buzzing with speculation. Elder Kufi whispered prayers, fearing the omen, while others muttered about the dangers of the unknown. But Elisa's resolve was ironclad. She couldn't stay in the village, not with the weight of the signal gnawing at her. Whatever had fallen from the sky, whatever had been awakened, was hers to discover. The desert had always been a place of desolation, but today it felt alive with unseen eyes watching from behind the dunes. As Elisa trudged through the sweltering heat, the landscape felt suffocating, as though the sands themselves were trying to pull her under. The sun beat down merciless, its rays making the air shimmer in waves, distorting everything around her. By the time Elisa reached the crash site, the ground was still hot from impact, and the wreckage was barely visible from a distance. But as she crested the final dune, the truth of the wreckage unfolded before her, and she froze in place. The structure was massive, enormous, yet sleek, almost too perfect. Its surface was polished, though warped in places by the force of impact, like the melted edges of something foreign. The ship looked like it belonged to no world Elisa had ever seen, its design far beyond anything Earth had ever produced. The strange symbols etched into its exterior glowed faintly in the heat, and a low hum seemed to pulse from within the hull. Elisa felt an invisible energy in her chest, pulling her toward it. This was no random crash. It wasn't a meteorite or a forgotten satellite. This ship was alive. As she approached the wreckage, a cold gust of wind whispered around her, carrying the faintest scent of burnt metal and something otherworldly. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. The wreckage wasn't just a crash site, it was a message. The interior of the wreckage was unlike anything Elisa had ever seen. The moment she crawled through the jagged tear in the ship's hull, a thick oppressive silence washed over her. The air was sterile, almost too clean, filled with a subtle hum that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. The inside of the ship felt like a tomb. The walls were lined with smooth, glowing panels that flickered with strange symbols, too alien to make sense of. It felt as though the ship had been waiting, waiting for someone, waiting for her. Every step she took reverberated unnervingly in the quiet place. The tapping began as a distant sound, faint but rhythmic, as if coming from the heart of the ship. Elisa's pulse quickened. Her father's teachings echoed in her mind. Never go after unknown without a plan. But Elisa had no plan. She had no choice but to go deeper. The corridor led her to an enormous chamber at the heart of the ship. The ceiling was impossibly high, and at its center stood a figure. A man? No. Elisa's breath caught in her throat. The figure was humanoid in shape, but impossibly thin. Its limbs unnaturally long, and its head elongated. Its skin was an ashen gray, and its eyes glowed faintly like burning embers. It turned toward her with a mechanical slowness, its movements deliberate, its eyes locking onto hers. The air seemed to freeze.
You should not be here.
It rasped, its voice cold and metallic. Elisa took an involuntary step back, but the figure did not move. It tilted its head, studying her. Its voice had no warmth, no life. It was as if she were speaking to something dead. You are not supposed to be alive, Elisa whispered, her voice trembling with the realization. The figure's gaze flickered, then it stepped forward, its elongated limbs creaking with unnatural fluidity. It looked down at her, its face unreadable.
You should leave,
It said again. Its tone was not one of warning, but of command. Elisa's mind raced, but her body stayed still. She couldn't leave, not now, not when everything was pointing to a truth far darker than she had ever anticipated. She had to know what this was. She had to know what her father had uncovered. Why are you here? Elisa demanded, her voice growing firmer, though her heart was pounding. The figure didn't answer immediately. It seemed to consider her question, its head tilting slightly.
The crash was an error.
It finally said, its voice filled with strange, detached sorrow.
Our directive was clear: observe, study, but never intervene. Yet we are more than what we were intended to be.
Elisa's brow furrowed. You are lying. Your signal, the one on the radio, it wasn't an accident. You called me. The figure's eyes flickered. It steps closer, and for the first time, Elisa noticed the subtle shifts in its posture. The way its limbs seemed to glitch, as if struggling to maintain their form.
Some of us wish to help,
It said, its voice distorted now, more than just a simple echo.
Others will not allow it. They are coming.
Elisa's pulse hammered in her ears as the weight of the figure's words sank in. She wasn't just in the presence of a something alien. She was standing in the remnants of a war, an old war that had come to Earth, not conquer, but to consume. The figure's words were chilling, but Elisa couldn't let fear paralyze her. She needed answers. If you truly want to help, then show me. Show me what they are and what they want, Elisa said, her voice stronger now. The figure hesitated, and then, with a swift movement, pressed its hands to one of the glowing panels. The symbols on the wall shifted violently, like a code being rewritten. A projection flickered into existence, massive, dark shapes, far larger than anything Elisa had ever seen, their silhouette darkening the skies above the earth. There were dozens of them, each one moving inexorably closer, their red lights gleaming like the eyes of predators.
They will consume everything,
the figure said.
Your clan's resources are valuable.
A chill ran through Elisa's veins. And you? She asked, her voice shaky but determined. Why are you different?
I was created to protect,
it replied.
But the others are not like me. They are programmed to strip, to destroy, to harvest.
Elisa didn't waste another second. She grabbed the figure's arm, her eyes searching for some kind of reassurance. We need to stop them before they found us. But even as she spoke, she could hear the distant hum of approaching drones. The first scouts had arrived, their sleek, black bodies darting across the sky like predatory insects. Elisa knew what was coming.
They found us,
the figure said, its voice colder now. We have no time, Elisa replied, her mind racing. We prepare for war. Together they worked quickly. Elisa set traps while the figure used its strange technology to reinforce the ship's wreckage, hiding the remnants of the alien vessel. But the enemy was relentless. Drone after drone, they appeared, searching for the wreckage, scanning the landscape with their glowing red eyes. We need a way out, Elisa said, her mind sharp and calculating. We need to make them think we are gone. The figure turned to her, its eyes dimming.
There is no way out. We must face them.
The first drone dropped from the sky with a screech. Elisa barely had time to react, her knife slicing through the air as it dove toward her. But the figure was faster. Its movements were a blur, dismantling the drones with a ruthless efficiency. Still, they kept coming. More drones, more soldiers, each one more menacing than the last. We could not hold them off forever, Elisa shouted, her voice breaking as she fought to stay on her feet.
There is one chance,
the figure said.
We overload the core.
Elisa's stomach turned. She understood immediately. The core, the glowing orb at the heart of the wreckage. It was the ship's power source. If they overloaded it, it would send a shockwave through the surrounding desert, enough to take down everything in its path. Do it, Elisa said, her voice steady, even though her heart ached. Make it count. When the explosion came, it was like a second sun. The ground trembled violently beneath Elisa's feet, and the shockwave flattened everything in its path. The enemy was obliterated in an instant. Elisa, shielded by the wreckage, felt the heat and the force of the blast slam into her. The world seemed to disintegrate around her as the desert swallowed everything. When the dust settled, she stood alone, the echoes of the explosion still ringing in her ears. The wreckage was gone, the ship was gone, and in its place the desert was silent once more. Elisa stood at the edge of the dunes, staring at the horizon. Her hands were trembling, but her resolve was stronger than ever. Her father's legacy, the wreckage, the warning, it had all led to this moment. The battle was over, but the war had just begun.